The air in the lawyer's conference room was the color of old money, mahogany, cream, and the metallic chill of conditioned air. It was a sterile environment for such a messy, human act as the dismemberment of a marriage. Liam sat at the vast, polished table, a single sheet of paper laid before him like a death warrant. Across from him, his soon-to-be ex-wife, Elena, radiated a triumphant impatience. Her fingers, tipped with blood-red nails, tapped a staccato rhythm on the leather of her designer handbag. Beside her, her father, Robert Blackwood, sat like a stone monarch, his posture an architecture of condescension. He owned rooms like this. He owned the people in them. Liam felt their collective gaze, heavy and dismissive. To them, he was a footnote in their grand family narrative, a brief, disappointing chapter they were eager to close. He picked up the pen. It felt unnaturally heavy. He read the clause one last time, though he had already memorized it, burned it into his mind as a brand of their contempt. And the party of the second part, Liam Sterling, shall receive as his sole and final settlement the parcel of land designated as North Acreage 7, consisting of approximately 88 acres of undeveloped, non-arable land. Non-arable, barren, useless, that was the consensus. It was the land the Blackwood family had used for decades as a dumping ground for old equipment and bad decisions. It was where the good soil ran out and the rocky, stubborn earth began. It was his inheritance for 10 years of his life. "Are you quite finished?" Elena's voice was sharp, cutting through the thick silence. "Some of us have actual assets to manage." Robert chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of pure satisfaction. "Let him have his moment, darling. It's the most he'll ever own. It's only fair he gets a good look at the deed." The insult was delivered with the casual cruelty that had become the background music of Liam's life. He didn't look up. He didn't grant them the satisfaction of a reaction. His focus remained on the paper, on the ink, on the quiet power humming in his veins. He thought of the long days he'd spent on that useless land, not with the bitterness they imagined, but with the quiet thrill of a treasure hunter who knows he is standing on the X. He thought of the core samples in his modest workshop, the lab reports tucked away in a fireproof safe, the hushed, excited phone calls with men whose names Robert Blackwood would kill to have in his phone. They thought they were leaving him with a pile of rocks. They had no idea they were handing him the quarry from which cathedrals are built. With a steady hand, Liam signed his name. The stroke was fluid, decisive, a full stop at the end of a long, painful sentence. He slid the paper across the table. The lawyer, a man whose loyalty was paid for by the Blackwoods, whisked it away. "There," Elena said, a brisk, dismissive finality in her tone. She stood, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. "It's done." She looked at Liam, a final, pitying glance. "I do hope you can make something of yourself, Liam, for your own sake." She didn't know. She couldn't possibly know. The dramatic irony was so thick, Liam could almost taste it. They saw a defeated man in a worn suit accepting crumbs from their table. They were blind to the architect of their downfall, sitting quietly before them, holding the blueprints. That signature wasn't an act of surrender. It was the pulling of a trigger in a long, silent countdown. Within 6 months, that simple scrawl of ink would set in motion a chain of events that would dismantle the Blackwood Empire. An empire built not on solid ground, but on the shifting sands of arrogance and pride. We've all been there, in a room where we felt small, underestimated, and unseen. We've all had to smile and endure, waiting for the right moment. It's a feeling that connects us, no matter where we are in the world. So let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now settle in, because this is the story of how a man they called simple and left for broke used their own blindness to claim a $12 million victory. The roots of their blindness ran deep, twisting through the entire decade of the marriage. Liam had been an outsider from the moment he'd entered the Blackwood sphere of influence. He hadn't come from old money. He'd earned his degrees and his expertise through scholarships and hard work. He was a geological consultant, a man who understood the Earth's secrets. But in their world, a world of stock portfolios, corporate mergers, and inherited prestige, his profession was a curiosity, a quaint and slightly dirty hobby. He remembered a dinner party 2 years into the marriage. The sprawling dining room of the Blackwood estate, a place Elena now called her own, was filled with her friends, women with sculpted faces and men with easy, predatory smiles. The conversation was a performance of wealth. One of them, a banking heir named Julian, had turned to Liam with an amused glint in his eye. "And Liam, Elena tells us you're a rock collector?" The table offered a ripple of polite, condescending laughter. Liam had felt Elena's hand on his arm, a subtle pressure that wasn't supportive but cautionary. "Don't embarrass me." He'd kept his voice even, calm. "I'm a geologist. I consult on land viability, resource management, and substrata composition for engineering and environmental firms." Julian had waved a dismissive hand. "So, rocks and dirt. Fascinating." He then turned the conversation back to a recent yacht purchase, and Liam was once again rendered invisible. Later that night, as they were getting ready for bed, Elena had sighed. "Did you have to be so technical? Substrata composition? You could have just said you help people find where to build things. You make it sound so grubby." Grubby. That was the word she used for his passion, for the science he respected. He'd looked at his hands, hands that could read the history of a landscape in a line of sediment, and for the first time felt a flicker of shame, quickly replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. He hadn't said anything. He had simply stored the memory away, another piece of data to be analyzed. The humiliation was often financial. The farm, Blackwood Fields, had been a wedding gift from Robert to Elena, a dynastic transfer of power that explicitly excluded Liam. His name was on none of the deeds, none of the accounts. His income, respectable by any normal standard, was a pittance compared to the farm's revenue and the endless stream of capital from Robert's investment firm. This disparity was a weapon Elena wielded with surgical precision. "I'm thinking of getting the new Mercedes G-Wagon," she'd announced one morning over breakfast. Liam, looking over a proposal for a new municipal project, had raised his eyebrows. "Another one? The Range Rover is barely a year old." She'd sighed that long, suffering sigh he'd come to know so well. It was the sound of a queen being questioned by a court jester. "Liam, please, don't worry your little head about it. The farm had a spectacular quarter. Besides, Daddy said he'd take care of it if I wanted. It's not as if we're using your money." Your money. The words were meant to diminish him, to remind him of his status as a kept man, a consort. He was a feature of her life, like the expensive furniture or the prize-winning horses, and his opinions on major expenditures were about as welcome as a horse's. He put his papers down. "It's not about the money, Elena. It's about the waste. It's a matter of principle." She had actually laughed. "Oh, Liam, you and your principles. They're very sweet, but they don't pay for trips to Aspen, do they?" She'd stood up, kissed the top of his head in a gesture of magnanimous dismissal, and left the room, her perfume lingering like a ghost of their conversation. The turning point, the moment the future began to crystallize, came on a cool autumn afternoon about a year before the divorce. He had been on the North Acreage, the parcel of land everyone ignored. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He just enjoyed the solitude there, the rugged, honest terrain, a welcome antidote to the perfumed artificiality of his home life. He was examining a rock outcropping, a strange quartz formation he'd noticed before, when he saw it, a subtle, almost imperceptible gleam within the stone. His heart had begun to beat faster. He'd chipped away a sample, his hands working with practiced efficiency. Back in his small, private workshop, the one part of the estate that was truly his, he'd analyzed it. It was high-grade silica sand, trapped in a massive quartz deposit. Not just any silica. This was the white gold of the tech industry, the foundational element for semiconductors, fiber optics, and high-end solar panels. Its purity was extraordinary. He'd spent the next few weeks taking discrete core samples across the entire 88-acre plot. The results were staggering. It wasn't a pocket, it was a sea, a vast, deep, and unbelievably valuable deposit, hidden just beneath the surface of the land everyone called worthless. He remembered the moment he tried to tell her. He'd found her in the living room, surrounded by fabric swatches for a new round of redecoration. She was on the phone with a designer, debating the merits of velvet versus chenille. He held a preliminary report in his hand, his excitement a palpable force. "Elena," he'd said, his voice tight with the discovery, "you won't believe what I found on the north property." She'd held up a hand, her focus entirely on the phone call. "One moment, Liam. No, Sabine, the azure is too bold. I want something that whispers wealth, not screams it." He'd waited. When she finally hung up, she'd given him a brief, distracted smile. "Sorry, darling. Crisis averted. Now what's this about the north property? Did you find a rare bird or something?" He'd held out the report. "It's better than that. Much better. I think the land is incredibly valuable. There's a massive silica deposit. It could be worth millions." She glanced at the paper, her eyes skimming the technical data without comprehension or interest. Then she'd looked at his hands, which were smudged with dirt from his work. A faint line of distaste appeared on her brow. "That's nice, dear," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Just try not to get any of that dirt on the new Persian rug, would you?" It was a nightmare to source. And that was it. She turned back to her fabric swatches, the multi-million-dollar report dismissed as easily as a child's drawing. In that moment, something shifted inside Liam. The hurt was there, a familiar ache, but it was quickly overshadowed by a cold, hard clarity. She hadn't just dismissed the report, she had dismissed him. His work, his passion, his discovery, it was all just dirt to her. He'd quietly retracted the report, folding it and placing it back in the worn leather journal he used for his field notes. The secret was no longer theirs to share. It was his alone. And as he stood there, invisible in his own home, he knew, with chilling certainty, that this secret would one day be his liberation. He would let them call the land worthless. He would let them cast him out with it. And he would wait. The 3 months that followed the signing of the divorce papers unfolded exactly as Elena and Robert had scripted. For them, it was a period of triumphant consolidation. For Liam, it was a time of quiet, methodical preparation. The contrast was stark, a perfect illustration of their divergent realities. Elena flourished in the public eye. She was the new face of Blackwood Fields, and she played the part with theatrical gusto. An article in a glossy regional magazine titled "The Heiress Takes the Reins" featured a full-page photo of her on a magnificent black stallion, the historic farmhouse gleaming in the background. She spoke of her vision for the farm, of modernizing the brand, of launching an artisanal line of cheeses and wines. She was portrayed as a dynamic, powerful businesswoman, a worthy successor to the Blackwood legacy. She hosted weekend parties that were the talk of the county, her laughter echoing across the manicured lawns where Liam was no longer welcome. Sometimes, on her way to a luncheon or a charity board meeting, she would drive her new silver convertible past the small cottage Liam had rented on the outskirts of town. It was a modest, unassuming place, with a small garden he was slowly trying to bring back to life. She would see his old, functional truck parked in the driveway, and a thin, satisfied smile would touch her lips. It was all so predictable. He was fading into the obscurity she felt he deserved. She and her father would discuss him over their Sunday dinners, their conversations laced with a satisfying blend of pity and vindication. "I saw him at the grocer's the other day," Elena said one evening, delicately cutting into a piece of roasted duck. "He looked tired, thin, and the clothes he was wearing, Daddy, it was just sad. Robert sipped his wine, a deep, expensive red. What did you expect? The man has no ambition, no drive. He was comfortable letting us provide for him. Now that he's on his own, he's discovering what the real world is like. He'll be begging for a handout within the year, mark my words. He has his 88 acres of dirt, Elena added with a laugh. Maybe he'll start a pet rock business. Their laughter filled the opulent dining room, confident and cruel. They were insulated by their wealth, by the echo chamber of their own superiority. The narrative they had constructed, of Liam as a weak, dependent man, now struggling and failing, was so compelling that they never thought to question it. They saw what they wanted to see. They did not see the man who spent his evenings not in despair, but in deep focus. The small cottage was not a symbol of failure, but a command center. In his spare room, converted into an office, maps of the North acreage were spread across a large table. The lab reports confirming the silica's 99.8% purity were framed not as trophies, but as tactical assets. They did not hear his phone calls. They were not to local businesses looking for odd jobs, but to a corporate lawyer in the city, a specialist in mineral rights and acquisitions, a woman known for her razor-sharp intellect and impenetrable discretion. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and she was meticulously constructing the legal fortress that would protect Liam's claim. They did not know about his weekly video conferences with Arthur Vance, his former mentor. Arthur was not just a retired professor, he was a legend in the material science industry, a man who had built and sold 2 multi-billion-dollar companies. He sat on the board of a dozen more. When Liam had first shown him the data, Arthur's eyes, usually placid, had lit up with the fire of a prospector striking gold. "My boy," Arthur had said, his voice crackling over the encrypted line. "You haven't just found a deposit, you found the motherlode. This isn't just valuable, it's strategic. The demand for this grade of silica is skyrocketing." Under Arthur's guidance, Liam wasn't just sitting on a valuable asset, he was leveraging it. They weren't looking for a simple buyer, they were orchestrating a strategic acquisition. Arthur had made a few discreet inquiries, and within weeks, a giant in the tech manufacturing world, a corporation named Novacor, had expressed fervent interest. They saw the reports and immediately understood the strategic advantage of securing a private, high-grade domestic source. While Elena was choosing new drapes, Liam was analyzing market projections. While Robert was gloating about his business acumen, Liam was participating in encrypted negotiations for a deal that would dwarf the entire value of Blackwood Fields. He drove his old truck, not because he couldn't afford better, but because he didn't care about appearances. He ate at simple diners because the food was honest and no one knew his name. He was living like a ghost, invisible and underestimated, and it was the greatest advantage he had ever possessed. He was gathering his strength, piece by piece, document by document, call by call. The storm was coming, and they were busy admiring the sunshine. The 6th month arrived with the crisp finality of late autumn. The leaves on the trees outside Liam's cottage had turned to gold and rust, and the air held the promise of a coming frost. For weeks, the negotiations with Novacor had been in their final, delicate stage, a complex dance of offers and counteroffers managed by Evelyn Reed and guided by Arthur's strategic mind. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the call came. It was Evelyn. Her voice was calm, but Liam could hear the undercurrent of triumph. "They've accepted the final terms, Liam. The board signed off an hour ago. The offer is firm. $12 million. Liam closed his eyes. He leaned his head back against the wall of his small office. The number was so large it felt abstract, unreal. $12 million for the land they had discarded like trash. He let the reality of it sink in, not as a wave of euphoria, but as a deep, quiet sense of vindication that settled into his very bones. It was the weight of justice, and it felt solid and real. "The funds will be placed in escrow pending the final transfer of the deed," Evelyn continued, her voice bringing him back to the present. "They want to close within 30 days. We need to schedule a final meeting to sign the transfer agreement. They've requested a face-to-face. All right, Liam said, his own voice steady, betraying none of the emotion churning inside him. I need to do one thing first, before the official signing with Novacor. What's that? I need to have a meeting with my ex-wife and her father. There was a pause on the line. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, was likely calculating the risks. Liam, is that wise? The deal is done. You have no legal obligation to speak with them. I know, he said. This isn't about a legal obligation. It's a personal one. Evelyn was silent for another moment, then seemed to understand. All right, how do you want to play it? The plan was simple, elegant in its cruelty. Liam sent a formal, hand-delivered letter to Elena at the farm, with a copy sent to Robert at his downtown office. The letter was drafted by Evelyn, its language intentionally vague and polite. It requested a meeting at their earliest convenience to discuss a matter of mutual importance regarding the final disposition of the North Acreage property. As he'd anticipated, their arrogance filled in the blanks. Elena called him that same afternoon. Her tone was not one of curiosity, but of weary impatience, as if he were a persistent housefly she had to deal with. Liam, I received your letter, she said, the sound of her clicking a keyboard in the background. I'm terribly busy this week. Can't you just tell me what this is about? If you're having financial trouble, I'm sure my father and I can arrange a small loan, for old time's sake. The casual condescension was so familiar it was almost comforting. It assured him that nothing had changed, that their blindness was as profound as ever. I'd prefer to discuss it in person, Elena, he replied calmly. It's a bit too complex for a phone call. Shall we say Friday, at your father's office, 10 a.m.? Fine, she huffed. But I can only spare 30 minutes. I have a caterer to meet at 11. He hung up the phone and a slow, cold smile touched his lips. It was set. The stage was prepared for the final act. The days leading up to Friday were a study in the quiet before the storm. A strange, almost preternatural calm settled over Liam. He spent his time tidying his small cottage, tending to his garden, organizing his workshop. He felt like an actor in the wings, waiting for his cue, every line memorized, every move rehearsed. He packed his worn leather briefcase with meticulous care. Inside, he placed a copy of the original divorce settlement, the geological survey summary, and the official offer letter from Novacor, nestled within a simple manila folder. The folder itself felt heavy, a symbolic object containing the weight of his secret, the proof of their folly. On Thursday evening, a cold front moved in. A steady, chilling rain began to fall, tapping against the window panes of his cottage. The sky was a uniform, bruised gray. It was perfect. The weather itself seemed to reflect the coming mood. Liam sat in his simple armchair, the briefcase at his feet, and watched the rain. He didn't feel nervous. He didn't feel angry anymore. The rage that had simmered for years had cooled and hardened into something else entirely. Purpose. He was no longer a victim of their story. He was the author of its ending. Tomorrow he would read it to them. The lobby of Blackwood Capitol was a cathedral of modern wealth. Soaring glass walls overlooked the rain-slicked city, and the floors were a polished expanse of black marble that reflected the muted, expensive lighting. It was a space designed to intimidate, to communicate power before a single word was spoken. Liam, in his simple but well-pressed suit, walked across the marble, his footsteps making no sound. He felt no intimidation. He was merely an observer in a foreign temple, here to politely announce its decommissioning. He was led by a silent assistant to the top floor, to Robert Blackwood's personal office. The room was even more imposing than the lobby. It was a corner office with panoramic views of the city skyline, a landscape of power and ambition. Robert sat behind a desk the size of a small car, crafted from a single piece of dark, exotic wood. Elena was seated in one of the plush, leather chairs before the desk, scrolling impatiently through her phone. She didn't look up when he entered. "Liam," Robert said, his voice a low rumble. He did not stand. He gestured to the empty chair beside his daughter. "Thank you for coming. Elena tells me you have something important to discuss. As she mentioned, we are on a tight schedule." The power play was immediate and unsubtle. He was the king on his throne, granting a brief audience to a commoner. Liam took the offered seat, placing his worn briefcase on the floor beside him. He took a moment to absorb the scene. Elena, bored and dismissive. Robert, radiating an aura of unassailable authority. They were so confident, so utterly secure in their position at the top of the world. "Thank you for seeing me," Liam began, his voice calm and measured. It did not carry the pleading tone they expected. It was the voice of a man stating a fact. "I wanted to ensure we had a final, clear understanding regarding the North Acreage property before I proceed with its sale." Elena finally looked up from her phone, an eyebrow arched in amusement. "Its sale? Liam, who on earth would buy that pile of rocks?" "A corporation called Novacor," Liam replied evenly. Robert leaned forward slightly, a flicker of interest in his eyes. He knew the name. Novacor was a giant, a player on the global stage, but the interest was quickly replaced by skepticism. Novacor? The tech firm? What would they want with 88 acres of fallow land? "That's what I'm here to clarify," Liam said. He leaned down and opened his briefcase, but he didn't pull out the documents just yet. He let the moment hang in the air. This was not the time for the revelation. This was the time for the accounting. He was here to present them with the bill for 10 years of disrespect. This was the list of grievances. "Before we get to the details of the sale," he continued, his gaze shifting from Robert to Elena, "I feel it's important to reflect on how we arrived at this point. This arrangement, where I was given that specific piece of land, wasn't an accident. It was a statement." Elena scoffed. "Oh, here we go. Are you going to give us a lecture, Liam?" "No lecture," he said, his voice remaining soft, yet carrying an undeniable weight. "Just an observation. For 10 years I was a member of this family, and in those 10 years, my work, my passion, was treated as a hobby. It was playing with dirt. It was grubby. My contributions were seen as negligible, my opinions irrelevant." He looked directly at Elena. "Do you remember the dinner party with your friend Julian, when he called me a rock collector, and you told me later that I should have made my work sound less technical? As if my expertise was something to be ashamed of, something to be simplified and hidden away so as not to bore your wealthy friends." Elena's face tightened. She remembered. He could see the flicker of recognition and the annoyance that he would dare to bring it up. He then turned his gaze to Robert. "And do you remember, Robert, the countless times you referred to me as a lightweight? The advice you so generously offered that I should get a real job with your firm, something respectable, where I could wear a tie and not get my hands dirty. You saw my independence not as a strength, but as a failure to recognize the superiority of your world." "Now see here," Robert began, his voice taking on a hard edge. "I was offering you an opportunity." "No," Liam interrupted, his voice still quiet but now infused with steel. "You were offering me a collar. You wanted to make me one of your own, to sand down my edges until I fit into the box you'd designed for me. When I refused, you wrote me off." He paused, letting his words settle in the vast, silent office. "The culmination of all of this was the divorce settlement. You, Elena, insisted on it, and you, Robert, encouraged it. You gave me the one piece of land you both agreed was completely and utterly worthless. It wasn't just a division of assets, it was a final judgment, a parting gift to remind me of my place in your eyes. You were leaving me with nothing, and you took pleasure in it." He looked from one to the other. Their faces were no longer smug or bored. They were tight with anger and disbelief. He had violated the unspoken rule. He had held up a mirror to their behavior, and they did not like the reflection. The air in the room was electric with tension. The preamble was over. "You were so certain it was worthless," Liam said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "That's the beautiful, tragic irony of it all. You thought you knew the value of everything, but you were blind. You were standing on a gold mine, and all you could see was dirt." He finally reached into his briefcase and pulled out the simple manila folder. He placed it on the vast, polished desk between them. It landed with a soft, definitive sound. A quiet bomb in a silent room. "I believe you'll want to see this." Elena stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Robert's eyes narrowed, a predator sensing a shift in the dynamics of the hunt. The initial shock of Liam's speech was giving way to a defensive fury. "What is this, Liam?" Robert demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Some kind of game? You come into my office, insult my daughter, insult me, and then you produce a folder? If you're here to sue for a better settlement, you can save your breath. The agreement is ironclad." "I have no intention of suing," Liam said calmly. He gently pushed the folder a few inches further across the desk. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here to inform you, as a courtesy." The word courtesy was a perfectly aimed dart. It implied he held a position from which to grant such things. Elena finally broke her silence, her voice trembling with rage. "A courtesy? After that sanctimonious speech? You think you can waltz in here and lecture us on your hurt feelings? You got exactly what you deserve, Liam. A piece of useless land for 10 years of contributing absolutely nothing." "That's where you're mistaken," Liam said, his gaze unwavering. He tapped a single finger on the folder. "You say I contributed nothing, but for the last year of our marriage, I was conducting the most important work of my life, right under your nose, on that useless land." He let that sink in. He could see the gears turning in Robert's sharp mind, the flicker of doubt warring with a lifetime of arrogance. Elena, however, was still blinded by her anger. "Oh, I'm sure," she sneered. "Surveying for rare insects? Looking for pretty stones for your collection? What masterpiece did you create out there in the mud, Liam?" The parallel was perfect, the echo of her past dismissals so clear it was almost poetic. Liam allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. "Something like that," he said softly. He opened the folder for them, revealing the top sheet. It was a geological survey map of North Acreage 7, covered in contour lines and data points. "For 10 years you owned that land and never once walked it," Liam said, his voice taking on the quality of a professor explaining a complex but beautiful theorem. "You never looked past the scrub brush and the rocky soil. But if you had, you might have noticed the unusual quartz formations. And if you'd had the curiosity to look closer, to take a sample, you would have found what I found." He slid the map aside, revealing the next document, the executive summary of the lab analysis. He pointed to a highlighted line. "The land isn't barren, Elena. It's the opposite of barren. It contains one of the largest and purest deposits of high-grade silica sand in the entire country. Not construction-grade sand. We're talking 99.8% pure silicon dioxide. The foundational material for every computer chip, every fiber optic cable, every advanced solar panel on the planet. It's not dirt, it's the engine of the modern world." A profound silence descended upon the room. The only sound was the faint, distant hum of the city and the drumming of the rain against the panoramic window. Elena stared at the paper, her mind refusing to process the words. Robert, however, understood. His face, moments before a mask of imperious anger, had gone pale. The blood seemed to drain from it, leaving behind a waxy, slack-jawed shock. He knew what a strategic resource of that magnitude meant. "It can't be," Elena whispered, the words catching in her throat. It was a statement of denial, a desperate plea to the universe to make it untrue. "But it is," Liam said, his voice devastatingly gentle. "I spent months verifying it. Core samples from every quadrant, multiple independent lab verifications. The deposit is estimated at over 40 million tons. Robert finally found his voice. It was a strained, hoarse rasp. A deposit that large, the value would be... He couldn't finish the sentence. Liam finished it for him. He slid the final document from the folder and placed it on top of the pile. It was the official letter of offer from Novacor. The company logo was at the top, elegant and understated. The key figures were in a bold, impossible-to-miss font. "The value," Liam said, his eyes locked on Elena's, "is $12 million. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. The number hung in the air, shimmering and terrible. $12 million. It was a figure that transcended a simple financial transaction. It was a judgment. It was the price tag of their arrogance, the monetary value of their contempt. Elena's face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful heiress disintegrated in an instant, revealing the spoiled, panicked woman beneath. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the letter to Liam's impassive face, as if searching for a sign that this was some elaborate, cruel joke. She found none. Robert reacted differently. The shock gave way to a surge of pure, desperate adrenaline. His mind, the mind of a ruthless capitalist, immediately began scrambling for an angle, a loophole, a way to claw back this catastrophic loss. "This is a mistake," he blurted out, his voice a low growl. He snatched the letter from the desk, his eyes scanning the text with furious speed. "A clerical error in the settlement. The land was always part of the farm's holdings. It's a family asset. It belongs to Elena." "Does it?" Liam asked, his tone one of genuine curiosity. He leaned back in his chair, a picture of calm in the eye of their hurricane. "I have a legally binding document, signed by Elena, notarized by your own lawyer, which states that North Acreage 7 is my sole and final settlement. The deed was transferred into my name exclusively. It is, by every legal definition, my property." "We'll sue!" Elena shrieked, finding her voice at last. It was shrill, ugly. "We'll take you to court. We'll say you defrauded us. You knew about this before the divorce. You hid it from us." Liam's calm was infuriating, impenetrable. "Did I? Please, point to the moment where I hid anything. In fact, I seem to recall trying to show you a report, Elena, about a year ago. You were rather busy choosing fabric swatches. You told me not to get dirt on the rug." The memory, now recontextualized by $12 million, struck her like a physical blow. She flinched, her face contorting with the agony of that remembered dismissal. The casual wave of her hand, the condescending words, they were now the most expensive mistake of her life. This is theft," Robert roared, slamming his fist on the massive desk. The sound echoed in the silent room. "You used your specialized knowledge against us. The courts will see that. It's deception by omission." "An interesting legal theory," Liam said, his voice still maddeningly level. "But I suspect a judge might ask why, as the owners of a multi-million-dollar agricultural enterprise, you failed to conduct your own due diligence on your own land. For decades, I simply did the work you couldn't be bothered to do. My knowledge is my profession. It is the very thing you spent 10 years mocking. Are you now saying that my professional expertise is a form of fraud? You can't have it both ways, Robert." The moral mirror was now a dazzling, blinding surface, and they were forced to stare into it. Every insult, every dismissal was being thrown back at them, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact that now formed the bars of Liam's legal cage. As if on cue, Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was a prearranged call. He answered it, putting it on speaker. "Arthur, good morning." The rich, authoritative voice of Arthur Vance filled the office. "Liam, just wanted to confirm you've received the final wire instructions from our people at Novacor. The board is ecstatic. We're already fast-tracking the permits. This deposit is a game changer for our domestic supply chain." Robert's head snapped up. "Arthur Vance, He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Vance was a titan, a kingmaker in the tech and materials world. His involvement lent the deal an unassailable legitimacy. The fantasy that this was some small-time scam Liam had cooked up evaporated completely. This was real. This was happening. "Everything is in order, Arthur," Liam said. "I'm just having a courtesy meeting right now. I'll be in touch this afternoon." "Excellent. Don't let anyone give you any trouble, my boy. That deal is as solid as the rock you found it in. And it's tied to you and you alone. We did our homework." The unspoken threat was crystal clear. Novacore, with its army of lawyers and its global influence, was backing Liam. Any legal challenge would be met with overwhelming force. "Understood. Talk to you later, Arthur," Liam said, and ended the call. He looked at Robert and Elena. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by a thick, heavy despair. The roar had become a whimper. Elena was now openly weeping, silent tears tracing paths through her expensive makeup. Robert had sunk back into his chair, looking 10 years older. The illusion of his power, so absolute just minutes before, had vanished. He was just a man in a nice suit who had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly defeated. $12 million, Elena whispered to herself, the number a mantra of her personal hell. Liam stood up. He left the folder on the desk. They could keep the souvenirs of their failure. "As I said," he stated, his voice devoid of triumph, holding only a quiet finality, "this was a courtesy. My lawyer, Evelyn Reed, will be in touch with yours regarding any formal inquiries. But the matter is, for all intents and purposes, concluded." He turned and walked towards the door, his footsteps now echoing with purpose on the marble floor. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The image of their shattered arrogance was permanently etched into his mind. As he stepped out of the office, closing the door gently behind him, he heard the first sound from within. It was not a sound of anger anymore. It was the sound of a woman's desolate, heartbroken sob, the sound of a world breaking apart. The weeks that followed the revelation were a slow, agonizing unraveling for the Blackwood family. The legal threats Robert had made in the heat of the moment proved to be nothing but bluster. His own corporate lawyers, after reviewing the ironclad divorce settlement and understanding the nature of Novacore's backing, had advised him in no uncertain terms that any legal challenge would be both ruinously expensive and doomed to fail. It would also be a public relations disaster, painting the family as both foolish and greedy. Robert, a man obsessed with his reputation, was forced to swallow the bitterest pill of his life and do nothing. The silence from their end was deafening, but the consequences were rippling through their lives in ways Liam had never fully anticipated. The $12 million wasn't just a fortune Liam had gained. It was a mirror that reflected the precariousness of the fortune they already had. Elena's life, which had appeared so glossy and perfect from the outside, began to fray at the edges. The narrative of the heiress taking the reins was predicated on the assumption of limitless Blackwood capital. But as it turned out, the farm was heavily leveraged. Robert had encouraged Elena to take out substantial loans to fund her ambitious renovations and brand expansion, using the farm itself as collateral. It was a classic, aggressive growth strategy, but it depended on steady cash flow and the ever-present safety net of Robert's wealth. With the public humiliation and the sudden, shocking awareness of what they had lost, Robert's attitude towards Elena shifted. The indulgent father was replaced by a disappointed, angry patriarch. His financial support, once a gushing fire hose, was reduced to a trickle. He was furious with her for her blindness, for her role in throwing away a generational fortune. He saw her now not as his brilliant successor, but as the architect of their family's greatest blunder. The pressure mounted on Elena. The bank payments for her loans were due. The contractors for the half-finished winery tasting room wanted to be paid. The artisanal cheese venture was burning through cash with little return. The illusion of effortless wealth was shattered. replaced by the grim reality of spreadsheets, debt servicing, and profit margins. The farm, which she had treated as a glamorous stage for her social life, was now a lead weight around her neck. About 2 months after their meeting, Liam heard through the small-town grapevine that a "for sale" sign had gone up on a 50-acre parcel of Blackwood Fields, a prime piece of pasture land that bordered the main road. Elena was being forced to sell off pieces of her kingdom to stay afloat. The story she told the community was that she was streamlining operations, but everyone knew the truth. The whispers started at the country club, in the upscale boutiques, and at the charity galas she now attended with a strained, brittle smile. The pitying looks she had once given Liam were now being directed at her. One evening, Liam was at a quiet local restaurant having dinner with Arthur, who was in town to oversee the preliminary site work at the North Acreage. As they were finishing their meal, the door opened and Elena walked in. She was meeting a man Liam recognized as a local real estate developer known for his cutthroat tactics. Elena looked haggard. The vibrant confidence was gone, replaced by a visible anxiety. Her eyes were puffy, and her movements were jerky and uncertain. She saw Liam. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. He saw a flash of the old anger in her eyes, but it was quickly swamped by a wave of something else: shame, desperation, and a raw, humbling defeat. She looked away first, turning her attention to the developer with a forced brightness that was painful to watch. "Tough to see," Arthur said quietly, following Liam's gaze. "But pride is a poison, my boy. Sometimes the only antidote is a strong dose of reality." Liam nodded, a knot tightening in his stomach. He had wanted justice. He had wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions. But seeing her like this, stripped of her arrogance and laid so low, didn't bring him the satisfaction he might have expected. It just felt sad. He was witnessing the slow, painful demolition of a person, and he was the one who had lit the fuse. His desire for justice was pure, but the fallout was messy and deeply human. A week later, Robert Blackwood requested a meeting. This time there were no power plays. He asked to meet Liam at a neutral coffee shop in a neighboring town. When Liam arrived, Robert was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. He looked smaller than Liam remembered, the imperial posture gone, replaced by the stoop of a man carrying a heavy burden. He got straight to the point. "Elena is in trouble," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual bluster. "The farm is on the verge of insolvency. The sale of the pasture land will only cover her debts for a few more months. She's going to lose it all, Liam." Liam listened, saying nothing. "I know what you must think of me," Robert continued, staring into his coffee cup. "Of us. We were wrong, arrogant, blind. I see that now." It wasn't an apology, not a real one, but it was the closest a man like Robert Blackwood could probably get. It was a concession of defeat. "I'm not in a position to bail her out completely," Robert admitted, the confession costing him dearly. "My own firm took a hit in the last quarter. My partners are watching me closely after this. They see it as a sign of poor judgment." Then came the pitch. "I'm not asking you to give the money back. I know that's impossible. But a loan, a private loan, from you to her. $5 million. It would be enough to stabilize the farm, to give her a fighting chance. You could set the terms. A silent partner, perhaps. You'd make a return on your investment. It's a good business proposition." Liam looked at the man across the table, the man who had called him a lightweight, who had belittled his life's work. He was now coming to him, hat in hand, not for a handout, but with a business proposition. The irony was staggering. He was asking Liam to use the money he'd gained from their arrogance to save them from that same arrogance. "No," Liam said. The word was quiet, but absolute. Robert's head jerked up. "No? But it's a sound investment. You'd be a fool not to—" He stopped himself, catching the old, familiar tone of condescension in his own voice. It's not about the investment, Robert, Liam explained, his voice patient. If I do that, nothing will have been learned. You'll go back to being the king, and she'll go back to being the princess. You'll see me as the bank, another resource to be managed. The lesson here isn't about money, it's about respect. And respect can't be bought or sold. It has to be earned. And until Elena understands what she has to do to earn it back, not just from me, but from herself, no amount of money will save her. He stood up, leaving his own coffee untouched. She knows how to reach me, he said, if she wants to talk. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Robert Blackwood alone with the bitter taste of his powerlessness and the consequences of a decade of pride. The first snow of winter had just begun to fall, dusting the landscape in a soft, forgiving white. 3 more months had passed. Liam was in his new office, a clean, modern space in a building he now owned, overlooking the town square. Down the hall, the Sterling Foundation was taking shape, a non-profit he had established to provide scholarships and grants for students in geology and environmental sciences. The $12 million after taxes and investments was not a treasure to be hoarded, but a tool to be used. It was already building something new, something good. The North Acreage, now renamed the Vance Sterling Silica Reserve, was a hive of quiet, efficient activity. Novacor, true to their word, was developing the site with cutting-edge environmental standards. The project was bringing high-paying jobs to the region, revitalizing the local economy in a way Blackwood Fields never had. Liam was a celebrated figure now, not for the money, but for the quiet integrity with which he had handled his sudden fortune. He had heard that Elena had been forced to sell another parcel of the farm, and then another. The main house, the historic farmhouse that had been the backdrop for her magazine cover, was now on the market. She had lost it. The kingdom had crumbled. She was living in a small rented house, the same one her father had once owned before his first big success. The circle was complete. His secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Sterling, there's a Ms. Elena Blackwood here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." Liam felt a strange calm. He had known this day would come. "Send her in, please." The woman who walked into his office was a stranger. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a plain wool sweater. Her hair was tied back without any styling, and her face was free of makeup. The imperious, confident heiress was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired, humbled, and terribly real. She stood hesitantly just inside the door, her hands clutching the strap of a simple cloth bag. "Liam," she said, her voice small. "Elena, please, have a seat." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the same configuration as in her father's office, but the roles, the power, completely inverted. She sat, perching on the edge of the chair as if she didn't deserve its comfort. For a long moment she just looked at him, her eyes tracing the lines of his face. "Your father came to see me," Liam said gently, breaking the silence. "He asked for a loan." She nodded, a flicker of shame crossing her face. He told me what you said, that I had to be the one to come." She took a shaky breath. "He was right. You were right." She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "I've had a lot of time to think. These last few months, living in that little house, having to count every dollar, watching everything I thought was mine slip away. I've been forced to look at myself. And I don't like what I see." Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not the angry, frustrated tears he'd seen in Robert's office. They were tears of genuine sorrow. "I was a horrible person to you, Liam. I was cruel and dismissive and arrogant. I never saw you. I never saw your value, your brilliance, your kindness. I was so blinded by my father's world, by money and status, that I couldn't see the real treasure I had right in front of me." She finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. "The land, the money, you earned that. You deserved it. What I don't understand is how you put up with me for so long, why you were ever kind to me at all." This was it, the genuine apology, the moment of true self-reflection. It had come not when she was on top of the world, but when she had hit the very bottom. Liam leaned forward. He didn't feel anger or even pity. He felt a sense of profound, quiet closure. Because I saw the person you could be, Elena, underneath all the noise, and because I believe people can change. He had a choice in that moment. He could have left her to her fate, a just and deserved outcome. But that wasn't who he was. Vengeance was a barren field. He wanted to cultivate something better. I won't give you a loan to reclaim the farm, he said gently. That life is over. But you have a degree in business. You're smart and capable when you're not trying to impress people. The Sterling Foundation is looking for a local program manager to oversee our community grant applications. It's not a glamorous job. The pay is modest. You'd be working for me, but it's a start, a chance to build something of your own, something real, from the ground up. Elena stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. He was offering her not a handout, but a job, a chance, a path to earning back her own self-respect. It was an act of grace she had never expected and knew she did not deserve. Why? She whispered. After everything? Because my wealth isn't the $12 million, Elena, Liam said, a truth settling over him with absolute clarity. My real wealth is in being the kind of man who can make an offer like this. Tears streamed down her face now, but for the first time, she smiled. A small, watery, but genuine smile. Okay, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Okay, Liam, I'll take the job. The resolution had begun, not with the recovery of an old kingdom, but with the first tentative step into a new, more honest world. A year passed. The world turned, and the lives of those caught in the orbit of North Acreage 7 settled into new, unforeseen patterns. Liam Sterling was no longer just a wealthy man. He was a pillar of the community. The Sterling Foundation had become a powerful force for good, funding not only scholarships, but also local infrastructure projects, environmental cleanups, and small business incubators. Liam, the man they once called simple, was now the region's most respected benefactor. He hadn't just won, he had used his victory to lift others up. He had found that the true power of his fortune was not in what it could buy, but in what it could build. Elena, true to her word, had taken the job. The first few months were difficult. She had to endure the whispers and the stares. She had to learn humility, to take direction, to be part of a team rather than its centerpiece. She worked hard, with a quiet determination that surprised everyone, including herself. She proved to be an excellent program manager. Her business degree, once just a credential, became a practical tool. Her intimate knowledge of the community, once used for social climbing, was now used to identify real needs and find effective solutions. She was no longer Elena Blackwood, the fallen heiress. She was Elena Sterling, a name she had chosen to reclaim, not as a wife, but as an employee, a gesture of her commitment to this new life. She was building her own worth, brick by humble brick. Their relationship was professional, marked by a quiet, mutual respect. The past was a silent ghost between them, but it no longer had the power to wound. It was simply a fact, the shared history that had led them to this unexpected present. There was no romance, no dramatic reconciliation. There was something quieter and perhaps more profound, a form of peace born from forgiveness and genuine change. Robert Blackwood had faded from public life. His firm had forced him into a quiet retirement. His reputation for shrewdness was irrevocably tarnished by the story of the barren land, a modern-day fable told in hushed tones in boardrooms across the country. He lived out his days in the shadow of his greatest misjudgment, a lonely king in a diminished castle. One crisp autumn afternoon, exactly 2 years after he had signed the divorce papers, Liam stood on a ridge overlooking the Vance Sterling Silica Reserve. The facility below was a marvel of clean, efficient industry. The land wasn't barren anymore. It was productive, providing jobs and resources that powered a world Elena and Robert had worshipped, but never truly understood. He held a small, smooth stone in his hand, one he had picked up that first day he'd suspected the land's secret. It was just a simple piece of quartz, worthless to most, but to him, it was a symbol. It represented the core truth of his entire journey. The world is full of people like Elena and Robert, people who judge value based on surface appearances, on brand names, on the shine of polished things. They are blind to the treasures hidden in plain sight, the worth of a quiet man, the potential in a patch of rugged earth, the power of knowledge and integrity. They spend their lives chasing reflections, and they are shocked when the mirror shatters. True worth, Liam now knew with absolute certainty, is never on the surface. It is not in the deed to a farm or the number in a bank account. It is in the composition of your character. It is in the patience to withstand humiliation with dignity. It is in the wisdom to know your own value when no one else does. And it is in the grace to offer a hand to those who once tried to push you down. The $12 million had been a powerful tool, but the real victory was the rediscovery of this simple, unshakable truth. He hadn't just become a rich man, he had become a whole one. This story is a reminder that the world often gets it wrong. It underestimates the quiet, the humble, and the principled. But patience has its own power, and integrity has its own reward. The most satisfying victories are not about revenge, but about proving your own worth to the only person who truly matters, yourself. What did you think of Liam's final decision? Was it an act of true grace, or should he have let Elena face the consequences alone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. And if you found this story of quiet triumph satisfying, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and vindication. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let anyone else define your value.